Welcome, everyone. We're slowly letting folks in from the breakout from the waiting room. And so we're just going to give it a few moments to let folks join, and then we'll get started. Another minute or so. While folks are joining, I'm going to go ahead and just start with our agenda for today. So we're going to do brief introductions, go over some community agreements for our conversations today, discuss why inclusive excellence matters, talk about the 4 I's: identity, intersectionality, implicit bias, and isms. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we recognize bias, what are microaggressions, and how do we interrupt bias. And then we'll have hopefully some time for some Q&A at the end. So my name is Keiara Auzenne. I am the Director of Diversity Initiatives at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And today I am co-leading this presentation with 4 of my community engagement fellows. These are graduate and undergraduate students who work with me to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion on the Scripps campus. And so I will let each of those individuals briefly introduce themselves. Erica?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Erica Ferrer, and I'm a 4th-year PhD student in marine biology at Scripps, helping the EDI team.
Thanks, Erica. Carmen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen. I'm a 4th-year undergrad studying environmental systems and policy.
Thanks, Carmen. Danielle?
Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Mccaskill, and I'm a 2nd-year PhD student in marine biology.
Thanks, Danny. And Nilusha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nilusha Waniapa. I'm a 3rd-year undergrad in environmental systems, and I'm an EDI fellow.
Thank you all. Carmen's going to get us started.
Yeah, thank you, Keiara. So here we're going to start off with our community agreements. We're not going to be going over all of them, but some that I would like to highlight is the first one, that all ideas are valid and that there are no right and wrong. Also, for number 3, we want to make sure to listen to understand. So listening to understand our presenters today, and also when we all go into breakout rooms, making sure to listen to understand each other and communicate our ideas clearly. And for number 7, make sure to participate fully because your contribution matters. And so for this next slide, I would like to clarify debate versus dialogue. So in the upper right, you can see for dialogue, it is something that is 2-way and cooperative. This means that it's an exchange of information and a way to build relationships. And this is different from a debate, which is 2-way and competitive. And its purpose is to maybe win the argument or to convince someone of something. So we really want to focus today on having dialogue and really exchanging information and building really positive and productive relationships today. And so the images we have here will be about talking about diversity, inclusion, and justice. So on the far left, the first image is for diversity and equality. We can see that we have diversity in the figure shown, and we have equality because each figure is given the same amount of resources, which is 1 rock each to peer over the fence, yet not everyone can see over the fence. The middle picture shows equity, where we still have diversity of figures, and everyone who needs the resources to see over the fence are given the right amount of resources, even though they aren't necessarily the equal amount of resources. And for the far right image, we have what depicts inclusion, justice, and liberation. So the obstacle that was present, which was the fence, was completely removed, which really includes everyone in the situation. And so what these images show is that diversity is necessary, but it alone is insufficient for inclusive excellence, and that we also require equity and inclusion and a sense of belonging when we are in different spaces.
All right, everyone. So for this next section of the workshop, we're going to start this off by having a very short activity. And so if you're comfortable, feel free to share this in the chat, and I will be reading a few of these out loud. So if you could please share something that is a core part of your identity that people may not know about you at first glance, and then follow up with that, naming a stereotype associated with one of those groups with which you identify that is not consistent with who you are. And so feel free to use this example on the bottom, and I'll give this as something that I've received a few times before. I am a Black woman, but I am not angry or divisive. And I'll go ahead and take a look at for that in the chat and share a few of those.
The
Hi,
chat is
Danielle.
currently
Yeah,
disabled.
the chat is
Oh.
disabled, Danielle. This is
Okay.
the thing.
To clarify for our attendees, thank you, Danielle. In the hub where you access the session, on the right-hand side is the Q&A and chat field within the hub. Any comments or questions you'd like to pose there at Danielle's prompt, please do, and we'll approve those so they can start coming through.
All right, thank you for that. Right, have any of them been approved at this point? I'm looking in the approve section. I don't see any.
We're not seeing much come through this morning. It's an early-ish conference morning, it looks like.
It's also very early. It's hard to think about this stuff right now. That's okay.
I don't see the hub.
Yeah, I don't see an option to leave anything in the Q&A.
Yeah, Danielle, I'm still showing chat disabled.
And
But yeah, I
Q&A.
think, is there a way real quick to just put the link in the, I don't know if we can click the chat in this window that we're all on.
Why don't you try raise hand?
Hi all. If you, I was able to access it. If you go to the Q&A box at the top right in the hub, and then you click ask a question, that blue icon, that allows you to post.
I don't see a hub.
In the hub.
Ah, got it.
If that helps. There we go. We're seeing some now.
Yay.
Great.
Okay, awesome. All
Where's
right, so
the hub? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it.
So the hub is the place you log into to access the conference generally. And the presenters are speaking through Zoom, but we can't chat through the Zoom feature. So there was a link that came to your email, and that link will take you to the hub.
Okay, thanks, I understand.
But
Awesome.
you have to click on ask a question, otherwise you can't type in there.
Yes, Sean, you are in the chat.
all right, so I'll go through a few of these that I'm seeing right now. I do see the system is confusing. Yes, I'm sorry, but we're learning, and that's part why we're leaders, because we're able to learn and move on the fly. So what I'm seeing is I'm a white man who wears collared shirts to work, but I'm a first-generation college grad who grew up with very few financial resources. Another one I'm seeing is I am a Latina, but that does not mean I am inherently sexual. Another one I'm seeing is I'm a Black woman, but I'm not angry. I'm a woman, but I'm the breadwinner in my household. And the last one I'll do is I am Asian, but I do not only care about good grades. And so next slide, please. And so those are wonderful examples of these different aspects of everyone's different identities. And so when we're looking at people's identities, I really like using this iceberg picture here. And I'm sure we've all heard that when we're looking at an iceberg, we're only really looking at the top 10% of that iceberg. And the majority of that iceberg is actually hidden underwater. So that's a wonderful symbol for looking at the different components of a person's identity. When we're looking at a person, and we're not interacting with them or really getting to know them, we're only seeing a very small percentage of their identity, such as race or age. However, we're not getting a full and total representation of who they are unless we get engaged with them and learn about those different aspects of who they are that are underneath this waterline of invisibility. So a very broad question I'll ask you is, who are you? Now, of course, that question is going to be very difficult to answer, and it's really going to depend on the context that you're in. So kind of digging at this a bit more, I'll ask, what are the different ways that you identify? Which aspects of your identity are most salient or important to you, and which aspects of your identity are most salient or noticed by other people? And next slide, please. And so one before.
Sorry. It's good.
And so when we're looking at our various identities that people may have in society, there are certain aspects of those identities that are not seen as valuable. And people who have those identities, those groups, may be more likely to be subjected to different types of oppression. And so here we're going to take a look at what we call our matrix of oppression. On the left-hand side, we have the social identity category, followed by the privileged social group, the border social group, the targeted social group, and the related ism with that. So this first example we're going to look at is race. So that privileged social group are white people, the border social group are biracial people, and the targeted social group are people of color, Asian, Black, Latino, and Natives peoples. So let's keep in mind so that in this particular example, we're defining biracial people as someone who has a white parent and a parent who's a person of color, such as myself. However, keep in mind that biracial people can have parents that are both from the targeted social group. Also want to take a note that the targeted social group, people of color, there's going to be disparities of unique experiences of oppression within this targeted social group as well. And so when we're thinking about the difference between white people and people of color, we can think of this as a spectrum from privilege to oppression. And we're looking at this border social group here, biracial people. They can lay somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, depending on their proximity to white people or the proximity to whiteness. And so this can manifest in different examples or different ways, such as a person's mannerisms or physical attributes. So one example is a person who speaks African American Vernacular English, or AAVE. They're going to be seen to have a further proximity to whiteness and be more in line with people of color, and so receive more discrimination and oppression in that way. However, a person such as myself, who's a light-skinned Black woman, well, because I have a lighter skin tone and I have a looser textured hair, I'm seen as having a closer proximity to whiteness, and therefore will have more unearned privileges. The next example we're going to look at is age, and this is a great example of seeing how a social identity category can actually change throughout a person's life. So for instance, the privileged social group here are adults, and the targeted social group are elders and children. Now, at some point, children are going to grow up to young adults and then enter into that privileged social group of adults, and then at some point in their life end up back towards that targeted social group with elders. Now, as you see here, there's all these various different social identity categories that we can fit into. However, it's impossible to just be one of these things at one time. We're always in multiple categories within our life. And so next slide. It's really important to understand how these different aspects of our identity can actually come together and move. And with that, we're using the term intersectionality. So now if you look at this picture with all the circles, all of these small circles here, collectively, they represent an individual person's unique identity. And that unique identity can lead to a very unique experience. Now, all of these different small circles can come together, or all these different aspects of someone's identity can intersect to create this unique experience with power, position, privilege, perception, and process. And so an example of this is the comparison of a young Black man with a middle-aged white woman. So the young Black man, that person may experience some of this power, position, and privilege because they are a man. However, they may also experience some discrimination because they're young and because they're Black. Now, if you look at a middle-aged white woman, the middle-aged white woman may experience some discrimination because they are a woman. However, they might also experience some of this power, position, and privilege because they're middle-aged, so in that privileged social group of adults, and then also because they're white. Now, if we take this even further and think about someone's occupation, that person's occupation or their social class, how that might also add to this intersecting identity. And then next, we'll think about occupation. So we talked about previously age, how that social identity group can change over a period of time. Well, so can occupation. If you think about this in terms of power, the power dynamic between an undergrad versus a graduate student versus a postdoctoral student versus a faculty member. And so as we're moving through these different spaces, some people have to be very aware of their identity when they enter a space and how people may perceive it. And kind of the take-home rule for this is, if you don't have to think about that identity when you enter a space, then it's a privilege. If you don't have to think about the fact that your gender expression may not match your assigned sex at birth when you enter a space, it's a privilege. If you don't have to think about how your race or your social class may be impacting or hindering your ability to access opportunities, then it's a privilege. And as we're moving through different spaces in life, we have to not only be aware of our own intersecting identities, but also the intersecting identities of other people, so that we can be the most impactful, the most effective collaborators, supervisors, teachers, and advocates for all people. Next, we're going to hear from Nilusha.
Thank you, Danny. So now we're going to be discussing perception and perspective. We interact with the world based on how we understand it. We may witness the same event, but perceive it differently based on our identities and backgrounds. So the challenge here is to recognize that multiple realities exist and your experience is not the only one happening. It is important to step out of our shoes, ask ourselves how someone else might feel or be perceived. Next slide, please. Now we're going to watch a video about privilege.
Oh, hold on. This is the wrong version. Hold on just a moment. I will get that added in here. Just a second. Sorry, folks. We had a last minute change to the slides and it did not cross over. So hold on just a moment. I'm going to, in slideshow, add the link in. Oh, there it is. It is in here. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. And we are back. Now this should play. There we go.
I don't know. White privilege. I just don't see it. You know what you need? What are they?
Oops. I think part of the video might have gotten cut off. Let me just try that one more time. I'm sorry, folks. I want to make sure that
I don't know. White privilege. I just don't see it. You know what you need? What are these?
White privilege glasses. Helps you see the world the way we do.
Mary Lucia?
So I'd encourage you now to think about anything new that you've learned or noticed from this video that you hadn't previously thought about. And I encourage you to put your reactions and anything new in the chat. So one thing I wanted to point out is the Jefferson street sign. Driving around, especially after watching this video the first time I saw it, I noticed how many streets and elementary schools are named after former slave owners, and I hadn't stopped to consider the impact that that has on people that slavery has affected. And another thing I noticed that stood out to me was the man in the store and the way that he looked at the white man versus after this man put on the glasses and the way he was perceived. And I would encourage all of you to think about how that made him feel and how that makes people feel in their day-to-day lives. So now we'll move on to the next slide. And here we'll be discussing reality versus perception, how clothing and race align with preconceived notions. Take a moment to think, who do you think is a teacher or a doctor or a graduate student out of these pictures? And who would you immediately see as a thug or someone that you wouldn't want to interact with? So thinking back to the identity iceberg, just a little bit of information, skin, hair, and clothes determines how we interact with other people. And these can cause us to inflict microaggressions, which we often can't see, but affect the other person tremendously, especially as they add up throughout the day. These clothing matters more for people of color. We dress well to be accepted and gain respect that we otherwise might not get. There have been instances where BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, doctors, even with the white coats, which are normally a standard and a symbol of being a doctor and prosperity, have been expected or treated as secretaries or janitors in meetings and expected to take notes just because of their skin color and the way that people perceive them. And another example is how Black women often straighten their hair to be seen as less radical or aggressive in the workplace and in everyday life. With that, I'll turn it over to Erica.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that Nilusha is alluding to when she asks you to think critically about the pictures you just saw are implicit biases. And one of the ways that implicit bias, which we'll talk about in just a second, manifests in the real world are microaggressions. So these are casual degradations of any marginalized group. They can be brief and commonplace. They can be unintentional. And they may seem small to some, let's say the person who offhand says the microaggression, but they can have macroscopic consequences on those who are receiving the microaggressions, whether intentional or not. They communicate hostility, derogatory sentiments, negative slights, and their insults, essentially. They create a sense of not belonging, not fitting in. They give a message to the person that you're speaking to that they're not welcome, not equal, and not capable. Next slide, please. So we're going to have another activity, and this time we're going to break you all up into breakout rooms where you can talk about this comic about why microaggressions hurt. So before entering your breakout rooms, we're going to link in the chat this comic here. So I'm going to send it through to everyone, and I don't think we'll have technical difficulties here. So can everyone see that in the chat? I see a few faces, maybe not. Okay, that's great. So before you join the breakout room, be sure to open this in your browser, take 3 to 5 minutes to read through it, and then share for about 10 minutes. Maybe to make it easier, you can either turn on your screen or give a thumbs up to the fellow people in your breakout rooms to show that you've finished reading, and talk about some of the microaggressions that you picked up on, and maybe even some of the microaggressions that you've experienced in your own life.
So are we dumped into breakout rooms or do we have to actively join?
We're going to assign you to breakout
You're
rooms.
going to dump us there. Great, thank you.
I see a few hands up. So before you join the breakout rooms, if you have your hand up still and you want to unmute, feel free to ask the question. I see just 2 hands.
This is Haciel Arroyo. Just to say that the chat is disabled for us. So when, the previous presenter was saying if we could, put a reaction or I don't know, write something on the chat, I just wanted to let you know that we couldn't because it's disabled.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So we've been using the hub. So the way that you signed on to the leadership conference, if you can use the Q&A. But fortunately, in these breakout rooms, you'll be able to just talk directly to each other. I see Jared has a hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the utilitarian strategies I tend to use when I'm just out walking around in public is wearing glasses, because wearing glasses tends to deracialize individuals. So they seem, if you're Hispanic or Black, you seem less threatening, you seem more coachable, maybe more intelligent and competent in some cases. Legal psychology has found that the person might seem less guilty in the courtroom if they're wearing glasses. So much so that there's some legal work arguing that if someone doesn't usually wear glasses and their lawyer has them wear glasses in the courtroom, it could be seen as like tampering with evidence or misleading the jury. So the effect of glasses in basically helping other individuals not engage in implicit bias or microaggression, I think goes a long way. And the reason I say it like that, helping other people like not engage in it, like let's say someone is, Jon Stewart or Tina Fey, they genuinely want to treat everyone equally, but it's been a long day, they're stressed out, they're mentally fatigued, and they can help but like maybe think something that's, biased when they see, Black, Hispanic, lesbian, Muslim person in line in front of them in Starbucks or at Bonds, right? So they can't help but think a certain thing, but if that person is wearing glasses, it might help them to suppress the thing they otherwise were going to say. It's like I know you don't want to maybe express implicit bias, like you're trying to be a good ally. And if I'm wearing glasses, I'm kind of making it easier for you, right? Compared to not wearing glasses, or if I'm not wearing a tie, I'm wearing like a tank top. Or if I have like a belt on versus my pants are sagging. It's like the person who maybe wants to be a good ally, when you dress certain ways, it helps them out. It like reduces the amount of effort they have to put into it because you've made it less effortful for them in your appearance.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm so glad we had the opportunity to hear from you. I know the Zoom format's maybe not the best, but we're going to talk about implicit bias next. And for anyone who already joined a breakout room, I'd encourage you to share that story there, because still the onus is you're making the onus in some way on you, right? So we can talk more about that. Thank you, Jared, for sharing.
Absolutely.
So is everyone in a breakout room now?
Looks like there are several attendees who may still be in this space, so please join that breakout room. You should have gotten a message to do so. If you have any questions for our presenters while you're in this space, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you're having any trouble joining a breakout room, feel free to unmute yourself, let us know. Keiara and Erica, just let us know when you'd like us to bring everyone out of breakout rooms, just in the interest of time and making sure we have time for everything else, so we can do that whenever you need.
Okay, thank you.
So in maybe about 3 minutes, if you could broadcast a message to everyone using that function to just say, hey, please start discussing amongst yourselves.
Absolutely.
And then from there, it'll be another 5 to 10 minutes. Fortunately, we're still good on time.
I'll go ahead and reshare the link to that comic as well when I broadcast that message.
Does anyone need the link or to be reassigned to a breakout room? I see Allison Ross wants to be reassigned to a breakout room. Madison, can you help with that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Keiara.
Anyone else? Just raise your hand if you want to be assigned to a breakout room. How are we doing on time, Erica?
We're still okay on time, though I noticed when I click the breakout room app or little symbol, the breakout room is timed for another 1.5 minutes, so it may just automatically bring people back.
Okay, that's fine too.
So in 30 seconds, I'll just broadcast a message saying, hey, please wrap it up, but feel free to stay another minute.
And we can ask people to share in the chat, what they noticed.
So all breakout rooms will close in 25 seconds. So if you're still in this space, just go ahead and stay here. We are discussing the cartoon about microaggressions, which you can access using this link if you joined late. Okay. I'm seeing everyone flood back in, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask that if you have access to the portal, that is the Triton Leader Conference portal that you logged in with, use the Q&A function to write things that you noticed while reading through the cartoon, or if you've experienced any of these microaggressions, you can also share those. I will read through as fast as I can. And I just want to say I can still see several from the previous activity of folks sharing something about themselves. And I just want to say thanks for that. These are very powerful. I'm not seeing anything yet. Again, if you've experienced any of these microaggressions, or if anything maybe took you by surprise as you were reading through, maybe you noticed a bias you had as you were reading.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm still having trouble figuring out the hub and how to get into the Q&A.
Okay, so when you go to the hub, do you see the Triton Leaders banner and the session that we're in? If you go to join that session, on the right-hand side, there's a Q&A icon. And if you click that and click the blue Ask a Question button, folks.
Hi, Erica. This is Majdan. Sorry, I'm also having the same issue. I do click join session, but it doesn't show me the option of the Q&A.
Okay.
If I may, I think it's, this is Ping. I think is your window small? If you widen the window, the Q&A shows up. It's actually doesn't even show up if it's a small window on your screen.
Sure, it is a small one. Let me enlarge.
Yeah, if you widen it, you'll see a little Q&A box show up on the right.
It may not also be on the right-hand side. It could also be right above the join session as a little button.
And I think you have to hit ask a question.
Yeah, you're right, Ping. It is small. You have to really be looking for it, because if you don't, you will miss it.
If you blink, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I do see it now. I appreciate it.
And folks, don't be offended. I have to decline some questions from the previous activity to see the new questions. So it's not personal. I see one now. This is great. That says, growing up, I didn't always realize that others were not treated the same way I was. Basically not realizing that those were microaggressions. Sometimes it feels, oh, I just lost that one. I'll come back to it. As a young woman, I experienced a lack of trust from older colleagues, more specifically men, when I'm speaking about financials. Additionally, I've also received a lot of comments from men to smile more. I think that was in this cartoon too. Not displaying a question right now. Okay. It has been traditional for men to hold the door for women. Is this instead a microaggression, assuming that women are weaker? So this is a question. I think this is a good question that unfortunately we may not have enough time to discuss here. I can't speak for everyone personally. I think it kind of depends on the context. So there's never really a right answer, but the one where Lainey is on the phone and they ask for the designer. Oh, that's so relatable. As a woman in structural engineering, contractors constantly overlook you and look for a man to answer their questions. Our group discussed how women, especially at night, need to worry about their safety. Harassing comments from a car driving by, telling her what to do and how to act using guys. These are normal instances that should not have, oh gosh, I hate that, it keeps jumping away. That should not have ever been normalized. People grow accustomed to microaggressions rather than avoiding them. I and the other people in my breakout room agreed that we experience microaggressions pretty regularly, and like in the comics, sometimes just roll with it because we want to live our lives without always having to take time to educate others. These are great. It sounds like many of you had good discussions, and in some cases, maybe all of you have experienced microaggressions at some point. In fact, I would think it's safe to assume everyone has experienced microaggression at some point. Some groups experience them on the regular. So these add up, 1,000 paper cuts. Next slide, please. We're going to watch one more short video on implicit bias. If for some reason it's not working, I'll tell Keiara and we'll get it working correctly.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phone started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. Sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of kind of old Jackson, Ku Klux Klan style.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We've never even realized that what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, and that kind of let us up, none of us did it.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So one of the things that I like about this video is it ends with just the very blunt statement, we're biased, and it shows this peanut butter and jelly, and maybe you have the association, I say peanut butter, you say jelly. That is to say, if you have implicit biases, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but you do want to take steps to correct for those biases, challenge those biases, and make the world a better place. Make it so that your colleagues around you, be them BIPOC or not, can exist easily next to you and don't go home like Yelena and have to process and self-heal constantly. So one of the best things you can do is start by recognizing bias. And with that, I'll turn it over to Keiara.
Thanks, Erica. Okay, so we tend to have preferences for people who sound like us, who look and dress like us, who have similar hobbies to us. Part of that's we're reflecting ourselves in those other individuals. People who appear physically fit and well prepared. So how we were talking about earlier, how when dresses can really affect how we interact with that person, people from the same college, university, or city of birth. So thinking about, Tritons, recognizing other Tritons and how we feel about that when we recognize that we potentially have shared a similar experience, and people of the same race, sex, religious conviction, and nationality. We have something in common. And so we automatically make an association with ourselves that makes it easier for us to interact with those folks. At the same time, we tend to have biases against people who seem weak or unhealthy, who look or sound different from us. So someone who has an accent or speaks differently, people with different values or principles, with very different backgrounds than our own, and people who we may find it hard to relate to. So there's a lack of similar interests or hobbies. So think about interviewing situations, how that interview changes when you're able to connect the interviewer and the interviewee, find something they can connect over, and that conversation becomes much easier than if two people are talking and they just don't seem to have anything in common. So you all were asked to take the Harvard Implicit Association test. And so it measures attitudes and beliefs that people may be unwilling or unable to report. And so it's really interesting because it can show you that you have an implicit attitude that you had no idea about. It also shows biases that are not necessarily endorsed. So you can say, I actively support women in science, but when you take the test, it might have shown you that you actually have a bias against women in science. It can actually be contradictory to what one consciously believes. So in the chat, please share which test you took, whether it was gender and science, race, if you remember, and at least share whether the results confirmed or surprised you. Was it something where you were like, oh yeah, I actually think that, or I'm aware of this bias, or you were completely caught off guard and didn't realize that you had these biases? Okay, I am not seeing the chats come in. I don't know if there's a limit to the chats that's blocking it for me.
For me, it says the chat is disabled.
I'm sorry, in the Q&A is where we do the chats. And yes, the slides will be available to the attendees. That question was asked twice. So for the folks that can figure it out, we can come back to that and read some of those, but in the interest of time, we're going to, I'm starting to see them. Body weight, fat versus skinny, the results were exactly what I expected. I took 3 tests, gender, I see what you mean, Erica, how they disappear. We go to the approved. Or they get voted on. That is very frustrating. Let me try another one. Age test, my results contradict my expectations. I took the race one. I wasn't surprised from the results. Disability, and I was surprised by the results. The bias toward those who are able. I took a couple of tests and showed a preference for Southern California, despite thinking I like the Bay Area better than 619. That is an interesting one. The president, intellectually, I prefer Obama, but tests showed slight preference for Biden. Really interesting. So the way that our mind is categorizing this information, it's based on the information that we have and the inputs, the media, social media, interactions with others. And as a result, we are developing biases that we're not even aware of. So when does implicit bias take over? When does it kick into hyperdrive? When there's uncertainty, when there's fear, fatigue. This is the most common one when folks are making admissions or hiring decisions. You're usually tired and stressed, and there's usually a time constraint. You have to meet a deadline. And so who you are selecting, how you're reviewing resumes, how you're reviewing student files, all of those implicit bias can kick in, and you just start operating based on your biases and not based on the full information that you have in front of you. Self-awareness. So thinking critically about how do I benefit from an affinity bias in my own career? An affinity bias is one of those from the previous list of someone who you have something in common with. So you're either in the same racial group, the same gender group, the same university that you went to, you have the similar hobby. That would be your affinity group. Did you benefit from your affinity bias in your career? Did a Triton hire another Triton? Did someone in my affinity group give me a key opportunity that contributed to my success? Who are the people I go to for advice guidance, or assistance? With whom am I more inclined to spend discretionary time? Go to lunch, participate in activities outside of work when we used to be able to do those kinds of things? Who makes me feel uncomfortable and why? To whom do I give second chances and the benefit of the doubt? The people in my in-group, and who do I judge by group stereotypes? So you're constantly wanting to check in with yourself and ask, why am I thinking this way about a certain individual or a certain experience? What are some methods for interrupting bias? So individuals' exposure has been proven to be one of the #1 ways to interrupt bias, interacting with people from different backgrounds and from different walks of life, and interacting with them and practicing curiosity. Intergroup contact, so once again, seeking out ideas that are different than your own. Education and training, so participating in workshops like this, learning to recognize the different types of implicit bias. And at the end, there's a resources slide with links. And one of them is 20 different types of implicit bias. Accountability, so managing the dynamics of intent versus impact. So with the microaggressions, a lot of times the focus is on the intent. I didn't intend to hurt someone. So unintentional is actually part of the definition of implicit bias. What we really want to focus on is the impact on the other person. So being more conscious of how you talk to people, how you interact with them, and what the impact of your actions are on others. And then of course, practicing, taking the time to recognize the bias, reflect on the bias, and then actively interrupting the bias. So using that chart of the 20, I didn't go into that because it's a little overwhelming now, but on the slides that will be sent to you, definitely check that one out if you don't check out any other ones. As an organization that you work in, you should go back and have these conversations and suggest that in their outreach and consultation with key groups, collaborate in an inclusive manner by listening to understand. That is the first step. Noticing who is in the room and who's not in the room and inviting them to participate. Having inclusive policies and statements of solidarity. Be brave, speak up, and create the psychological safety for others to speak up. That's what allyship is, particularly in your sphere of influence. What can you do is you can be an ally to others. Organizations should also focus on have representative membership, leadership, advisory boards, high visibility of individuals from different backgrounds. Folks can't be it if they can't see themselves doing it. Training, understanding the impact of stress, time constraints, fear, uncertainty, and fatigue on your brain's functioning. And so what can we do about it? The key isn't to feel guilty, because guilt tends towards inaction. It's to become consciously aware, minimize them to the greatest extent possible, and constantly check in with ourselves to ensure that we are acting based on a rational assessment of the situation rather than on stereotypes and prejudice. And so here's the slide that will be included with the slides, a number of different resources. And like I said, if you don't check out any of them other than this one, the 20 cognitive biases that screw up your decisions. And so the last would be, what is the one thing that you can or will do differently going forward to recognize and interrupt your biases? If you have questions, feel free to email us. You can also check out some of the awesome initiatives that the EDI fellows and I have been working on by going to our website at scripps.ucsd.edu/diversity. So I think we are at time. We have 2 minutes for questions. If you could use the raise hand function, we might be able to get to 1 or 2 questions. Okay, let's see. I'm seeing, is it Madge?
Yes, Madge. Hi, Keiara. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very informative, and I honestly like it so much. And I'd like to actually ask you a question and get your feedback, because I'm also doing a disability class as a TA, and I would like to see if I can, first of all, share some of your content.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And secondly, how can we really improve this when it comes to people with intellectual disability? Like I myself, I posted a comment, I'm of Middle Eastern origin, and I do feel it, even though I don't wear the headscarf, but it's even harder for people who wear the headscarf, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So in that sense, even though it's subtle, but I still do feel it, let alone people with intellectual disabilities or some kind of other disabilities. So I'm taking this class and I really would like to make a better impact. So I'd like to get your feedback how to do this, and also possibly work with you post this seminar so we could make things better. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Thanks for the question, Madge. I would say the biggest part is learning to recognize. So the 20 different types of biases, it's a little overwhelming to present all 20 at the same time, but even checking out that particular handout or that particular chart to learn about the different ways that implicit bias shows up and how it operates. So it has like 20 boxes and it gives an example of each kind. That's the first part, is being able to recognize the bias. The next part is being able to reflect. And so that takes that personal awareness of, how am I interacting with someone? How am I thinking about this person? Am I doing the thing of holding the door for someone when they can open the door for themselves? Part of that's being polite, but what else could that be signaling? The other question, you're speaking more about intellectual disabilities. Part of that's just being aware and being open and understanding that different folks have different capabilities and meeting people where they are. So not expecting everyone to do everything the same way. Being open to differences in terms of how we interact with individuals, because that's when the intellectual disabilities can come across. You hear someone who's perhaps having a hard time finding their words. It's, it could be a language barrier, but it could also be an intellectual disability. Just having patience and understanding with people goes a long way. I think we saw one more hand up, Luana.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you so much for such a thorough presentation. I really appreciate that you engage with students, and I particularly appreciate that this presentation is coming from SIO, and looking forward to seeing what else we can do. And because this is happening during Black History Month, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone to please go online and check out the Black History Month calendar to see the different activities and events that are coming up. And I have to do a shameless self-plug. I'm hosting an event that it's called Dream Forward 2081. It's an Afrofuturism dream tank. And it's an opportunity where I kind of bombard you with art, music, poetry, a little bit of educational content, and lots of opportunity to do art and engage in discussions to create a vision or co-create a vision of what we'd like to see 60 years from now, and have a little bit of meaningful discourse or dialogue rather about what actions we can take individually and collectively to realize those visions.
Thanks, Luana. Yes, this is Black History Month, and there are a number of events and activities planned throughout the month. And there's a Black History Month calendar. So if you go to Blink and just type in Black History Month, there should be a link to all of the events that are happening across the campus. And so I don't know if Madison, you want to take over and mention the Take a Triton to Work and the other slides that are here.
Can I interject super quick? Luana,
Yeah.
Could you say the name one more time? I'm going to write it down.
So it's called Dream Forward 2081. It's part of the Craft Center's online grand opening. It's the finale event, and I will have artists, poets, music producers. It should be an interesting experience. And it's also co-sponsored by the Arthur C. Clarke Center for the Human Imagination, and of course, the UCSD Black Staff Association. The way to get to the event is super easy. I made a bit.ly link. It's just bit.ly /dream 2081. Everybody knows how to spell dream. Bit.ly is case sensitive, so capitalize the D. So dream with the big D 2081, no space.
Can you repeat the one before the dream you were saying?
B like boy, IT like Thomas, .ly. And then it's / and then dream 2081. And the idea is this is the 60th anniversary of our institution. And what do we want to see happen in the next 60 years?
Thank you, Luana.
Thank you
for sharing that. I think we sent it out to everyone. And And so yes, Take a Triton to Work is March 22nd through 25th. TritonsConnect.com for more information. And then there's Alumni Celebration Weekend, May 14th to the 15th this year. So save the date, May 14th to the 15th. And then also there are the Global Days of Service in February 2021, hashtag UCSD Cares. It's not just a hashtag, it's at the core of what it means to be a Triton. So you can find a service project if you go to alumni.ucsd.edu, Days of Service.
I have a quick question, please, about Take a Triton to Work, because now with remote learning, I did get this email once. How would you help take someone to work? Because I'd like to provide mentorship to younger people, but I just don't know how. Thank you.
Madison or one of the other conference leaders, can you jump in on how that's working?
Also, real quick, the address on that, on Luana's event is bit.ly.
Thank you. And it's Dream 2081.
So 2081.
Yeah. Okay, I think they sent it out to everyone. Okay, and then the question about the Take a Triton to Work. Is there anyone from alumni that can answer that question?
Madge, I can reach back out to you. I'll send you an email and get you connected for that.
Thank you.
Alumni Celebration Weekend, Global Days of Service. And then the last slide is You Care. This is save the date for the UC San Diego Day of Caring. So that's May 13th, 2021. I just want to send a big thank you to all of the participants. This has been a great, great, great session. Really, all of the comments in the chat are spot on. So take a moment to go back and read some of those before you log off. And then we will see you all at the next session, hopefully. Take care and have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
very
Keiara.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. And I'll reach out to you, Keiara, afterwards.
Okay, perfect. Yes, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Keiara. Great job.
Thank you so much,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.